Here again is Anatoly Kuznetsov with CBS News correspondent Morley Safer.
You know, Anatoly, at the very beginning, a great many people outside the Soviet Union had great hopes for communism. What went wrong?
Communist doctrine, communist teaching is very attractive. And it grew out of good convictions and beliefs. But life, it appears, is a good deal more complex than it appeared to the founders of communism. And we see ancient history being repeated again. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Thanks to communism, that road has become many miles longer. I only have to mention the name Stalin, and you're bound to agree with me. If that is possible, if it's possible to have millions of victims completely senselessly, that means that the idea itself is no good.
But how is it that the Russian people, with their great sense of nationality, great sense of being Russian, how on earth were they so easily cowed?
Oh, there is in Russia a long, long tradition of tyranny. See, if you were born in a concentration camp and your parents were born in a concentration camp and your grandparents were born in a concentration camp, you see, you no longer imagine any other life. First of all, the Tsars oppressed Russia, and then came communism. There was that little short period, that intermission in 1917 between February and October. That was so small that you can really write it off.
Well, there was another brief intermission, a tiny crack of light created by Khrushchev a few years ago. What went wrong there?
No, no. That was only just a nuance, just a shade. I personally didn't take that seriously. That was really just as if in that same concentration camp you just make slightly more human conditions. So you're banned from writing letters and receiving parcels, say, and then for a time you were allowed to write letters and allowed to receive parcels. And see, some people took it all seriously and thought that very soon the doors were really going to open. No, no, no. The Soviet regime cannot possibly open the doors properly. It seems to me at the moment when I think about it, it's like some nightmare, some frightful dream. Life is like some constant, unbroken theatrical production. Never say out loud what you really think, but what you ought to say. There are, of course, some people who do say what they think. But these are just people, not very bright people, who are just using set phrases of official propaganda. But a A thinking man finds it very hard there. It's a terrible system of universal informing, universal following. You cannot trust a single person there. It's quite possible for a son to inform on his father, or a wife on her husband. Not to mention what friends can do to friends.
What gave you the idea or the sense that it might be any different in the West?
They isolate us all from foreigners, but we read books. And sometimes we're able to travel abroad. In order to know a little bit more about the world, I specially learned Polish. So you can buy Polish newspapers in Moscow. And they tell you more about the world than Russian newspapers do. And then, after all, once I was actually in Paris, 9 years ago. But then I also became a criminal. I got away from my group once in Montmartre and got to know an artist who was painting modern pictures. I asked him whether he was allowed to paint pictures like that. He just laughed. I went home with him. He showed me his pictures, said he'd won some prizes for them. I said, this is just a fantastic life. This is just tremendous happiness. He took me to the window. He lived up in an attic right at the top. He said, look, it's all right here. Why the hell do you want to go back to Russia? Why don't you stay here with me? I'll paint what I like, and you can write what you like. And a glass of milk will be... We'll have enough for a glass of milk.
Why didn't you do it then?
Это очень страшно человеку, который родился, я говорю, и вырос в концлагере. Так вдруг неожиданно это нужно быть очень решительным.
It's very frightful for a person who's born in a concentration camp. It's too sudden. I'd left my wife, whom I loved in Russia, my son who was only just born then. I listened to it as if it was like a fairy tale, something fantastic. You see?
Did you brood on that when you got back to Russia?
All thinking people in Russia think about this and brood on it. You see, it's very difficult. We Russians are very fond of our country. Every single emigrant is really suffering from a sort of nostalgia. And then, of course, it's especially frightful for a writer to cut himself off from his people.
Yet, as a writer in the Soviet Union, you were a member of a very select group of people. What I'm really trying to get at is when you sat around with other writers, thinking men, intellectual people, what on earth did you talk about?
Mostly we complain. It's just one long complaint. One of them say he's written a novel and so they won't publish it. Or else they publish it in such a frightful form that he's simply desperate.
Isn't that dangerous, though? Well, just where do you draw the line in these conversations? Can you really ever trust each other?
На 100% никому нельзя доверять.
100% you can't trust anybody.
Нужно вести разговор так.
You have to carry on your conversations like this.
Это плохо, и это плохо. Но это ошибки.
Now, you say this is very bad, and this is bad, and this is bad, but these are all mistakes.
Но в целом мы коммунисты.
But altogether, we are communists.
Мы считаем, что только мелкие ошибки делаются.
We just think that there are little small mistakes committed in Russia.
Anatoly, I've read everything you've written, and one word keeps coming up in almost every article. The word cynicism. Could you expand on that?
Я сейчас очень счастливый человек.
I am, at this moment, a very fortunate person.
Я впервые в жизни говорю то, что я думаю.
I am, for the first time in my life, saying what I really think.
В России люди, очень многие, думают то же самое, что я.
Many, many people in Russia think exactly the same as I do.
Я отвечаю за свои слова, я знаю.
I'm responsible for my words. I know what I'm saying.
В этом театре, в этом цирке мы должны жить.
Insofar as we have to live in that theater,
Что каждый человек имеет набор, так сказать, комплект фраз, которые он говорит официально.
every single person has a sort of collection of phrases which he speaks and says officially, publicly,
Соответственно, и набор поступков.
and a corresponding collection of actions.
Поскольку это все-таки нормальному человеческому существу очень трудно вести двойную жизнь.
Insofar as to a normal human being, it's extremely difficult to lead such a double life.
What are the rewards for that cynicism?
О, конечно. Он получает возможность
Well, of course, he gets the possibility
богаче, чем другие.
of living more richly than others, being better off than others.
Может получать товары, продукты в специальных магазинах.
He can buy commodities in special shops.
Ну, отпускает путешествовать по миру.
He will be allowed to travel abroad.
Его награждает Афина.
He may receive decorations, official state medals,
Вы это понимаете, правильно?
state prizes.
Do any of your colleagues place any real value on these awards?
Нет, у нас весьма холодно относится над тем, кого мы...
No, on the whole, we're pretty cool towards the sort of rewards you get.
Мой роман «Бабий Яр» был выдвинут на государственную премию.
My novel Babyi Yar was put forward for a state prize.
То, что раньше называлось
Used to be called Stalin prizes.
Когда об этом напечатали в газетах, многие хорошие люди
But when this was reported in the newspapers, a lot of very decent people began to change their attitude towards me for the worse.
К счастью, мне эту премию не дали.
Fortunately for me, I didn't get the prize.
The Soviet authorities were very unhappy with your novel, Babyi Yar. Now, I know that book, and it's a simple account of how the Nazis slaughtered hundreds of thousands of Jews and Ukrainians in the Ukraine. What on earth did they object to in that?
По три претензии было к этой книге.
There were three main objections to the book.
Во-первых, в Советском Союзе очень большой антисемитизм.
But in the first place, there is a great deal of anti-Semitism in the Soviet Union.
А Бабий Яр прежде всего связан с убийством евреев.
And Babyi Yar is primarily concerned with the murder of Jews.
Они предпочитают не говорить об этом.
The Soviet officials prefer not to talk about this.
Затем мой роман был шире. Он рассказывал о первом периоде войны, почему было такое страшное поражение.
Then my novel went rather further than this. It begins with talking about the beginning of the war and inquiring why there was such a terrible defeat at that time.
Дело в том, что многие русские люди, особенно украинцы, ждали Гитлера как избавителя.
So the truth of the matter is that a great many Soviet citizens, and especially Ukrainians, waited for Hitler as a liberator.
Потом оказалось, что он им предлагает такой же террор, как и Сталин.
Then it turned out that the Germans were offering them the same kind of terrorist regime as Stalin.
Народ оказался между двух огней, между молотом и наковальней.
So the people found themselves between two fires, between the hammer and the anvil.
Он предпочел собственный русский террор.
The ordinary citizen preferred his own Russian form of terror.
И третье, к чему цензура цеплялась, это чисто художество.
And the third objection on the part of the censor was purely literary quality, my literary methods.
Они считают, что они знают лучше, чем я, как мне нужно писать.
They considered that they knew better than I how I should write.
Поэтому там была сделана такая масса купюр, переделок, что роман просто...
Consequently, they did such an enormous number of cuts and changes that the novel, in fact, was turned upside down.
Все мои романы.
And all my novels have been treated in the same way.
Я стою всегда перед дилеммой. Или печатать хоть что-нибудь, или ничего.
So I'm always faced with the dilemma of printing at least something or publishing nothing at all.
Но в конце концов мне стало настолько это противно что-нибудь печатать.
But in the end, it became so objectionable to me what they're going to print.
Что я вот сейчас просто отказываюсь.
But I simply reject the whole of it.
Now, in coming out, you didn't really come out alone. You came out with everything you'd ever written. How did you achieve this?
Я работал много дней.
I'm a bit of an amateur photographer, and I took pictures. All my manuscripts, I put them onto film. I'll show you some of them. I've got them here. That's roughly, that's the sort of thing, just ordinary film.
Вот это все примерно.
I managed to get 6 sheets, typing sheets, onto each exposure.
Вот я снимал
You see, if you brought it all out as actual manuscript, well, it would make something like 5 or 6 cases, 5 or 6. So I squeezed it, wound it up really tight, and it didn't take up much more room than that cigarette pack.
Я это спрятал здесь в пиджаке.
I hid it inside my jacket.
Все мое имущество, с которым я выехал из России.
And that really were the whole of my possessions, the whole of my property with which I came out of Russia.
Все, что я написал.
And that there is the whole of my life.
Не те, которые...
These are my real books, not the ones as they are known to the reader.
You've left your homeland, as restricted as it was your home. Do you think you'll be able to find the things that you're searching for in the West, or will you always remain Kuznetsov, the man who left?
Конечно, я делаю совершенно отчаянную попытку сделаться другим человеком.
Of course, I'm making an absolutely desperate effort to turn myself into another person.
Мне неприятно, когда называют меня Кузнецов.
I don't like it when people call me Kuznetsov.
Это скомпрометированная фамилия.
This is a compromised name.
Только будущее покажет, смогу ли я быть настоящим художником.
Only the future will show whether I can be a real artist and writer and a person.
Well, we in the West have all sorts of problems. Vietnam and other things that are tearing our society apart. Have you ever thought about any of these things?
Да, конечно.
Yes, of course.
Я считаю, что война во Вьетнаме продолжается только из-за Советского Союза.
I consider that the war continues in Vietnam only because of the Soviet Union.
Но если насчет Америки со мной согласятся многие мыслящие люди в России,
As for America, there's a lot of thinking people in Russia who think the same as I do,
то насчет Вьетнама гораздо меньше.
but rather less as far as Vietnam is concerned.
As a thinking man in the Soviet Union, did you regard the United States as a threat to peace, as a threat to yourself?
Я слишком мало живу на Западе и слишком мало еще имею информации.
I've been living too short a time in the West and have too little information.
Я совершенно не знаю Америки.
I have no knowledge at all of America.
Я очень хочу туда поехать.
I very much want to go there.
Но сейчас и давно, и постоянно мое личное мнение,
But now and for a long time, my personal opinion
что агрессором в
is
этом мире является Советский Союз.
that the real aggressor in the modern world is the Soviet Union.
Они не скрывают своих целей, они говорят, что коммунизм должен быть во всем мире.
They don't conceal their aims. They say that communism spread over the whole world.
Западный мир, в том числе и Америка, защищается.
That after all, the Western world, including America, defends itself.
You know, even here in the West, one of the great conflicts at the moment for writers is a writer's commitment, a writer's involvement in politics. Do you feel that even here you must engage yourself?
О, Боже, как я от этого устал.
Oh, God, how I'm tired of all that.
Я не хочу никакой политики.
I don't want to have anything to do with politics.
Вы мне задаете политические вопросы, я рассуждаю как дилетант.
You put me political questions, but my answers are the answers of a dilettante.
Мне очень нравится писать.
I really like writing,
Художественно писать.
writing literature.
Там я дошел до такого положения, что больше не могу жить, там я не могу этого
So
делать.
there I got to the point where I felt I couldn't live there anymore. I couldn't do it there.
Я попробую это делать здесь.
So I'm going to try to do it here.
Вот на это я только надеюсь.
That's all I'm hoping for.
You called Russia a concentration camp, yet you've left your own family back in that concentration camp. Do you fear for them?
Очень, очень.
Very much indeed.
And do you think the Soviet authorities will make them pay for your crime?
Не сомневаюсь.
I have no doubt about that.
And so you feel some guilt over that, too?
Да. Да.
Well, even here in the West, you're living under strain, under great tension.
Да.
How long can a man go on living like that?
Не знаю.
I don't know.
Мой агент Анджипаридзе рассказывал мне много случаев, какими совершенно невероятными способами они могут убить человека или воздействовать на него. Они закуривают при вас сигарету, открывают портсигар, и в это время у вас вылетает крохотная иголка с цианистым калием. Ну, это уже не имеет отношения к делу, но просто я их боюсь.